Greetings, YouTube, and here is the much anticipated, oops, there we go, much anticipated second edition Pathfinder video. Folks have been bugging me about this for a while now, so I am going to be doing it today. I'm going to be using my phone because my digital copy is here. I'm going to be making frequent references to the first edition rules, and I'm also going to be making references to this game right here. So a couple of things up front besides that. I've already read through this set of rules once. It was several months ago. I've been trying to percolate it in my head. Also, I wanted to make sure I had the time to do it. I'm on holiday at the moment, so I have the time to do it, and I'm not dead tired from working every day. I've also been putting us off, in all honesty. It's a big video, and it's going to be complex, and I know I'm going to miss things, and I'm going to probably get some things wrong. So if I don't hit every note perfectly, be aware that I'm not either. So I am not perfect, and I am not going to get everything done the way exactly everybody wants it. I am probably going to miss some points that you think are very, very vital that I cover, and I won't. So I've never made any bones about the fact that Pathfinder First Edition, that first book I showed you, is the best version of D&D that I have ever seen. Not only is the core rule book awesome, but the supplement from Dreamsguard Press that covers psionics is the best spell point system I have ever read. Their psionics rules are incredible. And that alone, in my book, is enough to justify the existence of First Edition. But I also understand that First Edition is incredibly complex. There are so many books, and there are so many rules, and there are so many feats and spells and options that it is overwhelming. It is a situation where you have it's a curse of it's a situation where you're cursed with plenty. The paralysis of choice is very much present in first edition, and at the moment that is not the issue with second edition. I say at the moment because the only way Paizo makes money is if they keep selling books. Now, as I have said recently in a video, I am very much against Paizo at the moment. Now, when I read this, I did not know about the issues that Paizo had going on when it comes to treating its employees like garbage, or its desire to not be progressive. It's something that was being put forth by the authors and the outside writers of their products, but that the internal politics of the company were such that progressivism was not something that they were concerned about. So that alone says don't get yourself involved in second edition. If the players' union finally kicks in and it does actually successfully get itself some power and can fight back against the management, maybe I'll turn around on that one. But at the moment, my thought is stick with first edition, buy them on the secondhand market, and don't ever give Paizo a single penny again, ever, even though they produce things that I still like. For example, the Starfinder line, which I will never buy again unless they make amends and the employees get their union. So, having said all that, let's look at the rules as a set of rules, free from the politics that have arisen since I read them, and with the concept in mind that I, again, am not perfect, and I'm probably going to get things wrong or miss things that you consider important. And I'm going to use the table of contents as my notes because that's the easiest way to do this. So, a bit of background. One of the big selling points for me and for many others that are first edition fans is that it is backwards compatible with 3.5. So all of your 3.5 material with very little effort can be used under the Pathfinder set of rules. Okay? And you can use 3.5 material with Pathfinder with very little difficulty. For example, if you're playing a spellcaster, an arcane spellcaster, and you're really into making magic items, and you're really into using magic items, it wouldn't be difficult for you to pick up Forge Ring, which is part of the first edition rules, but also pick up Extra Ring from 3.5, which is a feat that allows you to wear 4 rings instead of 2. That would click perfectly with first edition Pathfinder. No one would bat an eye in that. You have the skills to do it. You've taken the feat to make them. You're at the appropriate level. So you want to wear 4 rings instead of 2 rings, and you're willing to spend a precious feat on that? Go for it. Oh, and by the way, this is a stylus in my hand in case anybody's asking. It's one of those no touchy things, but it's the best stylus I've ever owned, and I use it all the time. And so that was a big selling point, and many people have referred to Pathfinder First Edition as 3.75, as the next iteration of D&D. And I personally think that Pathfinder First Edition should have been Dungeons & Dragons 4th Edition. That should have been the rule set we got, but we didn't. We got something that was a completely different beast. But thanks to the 3.5 open gaming license, we got a plethora of content out there. It revolutionized the entire gaming market. There are numerous entities in existence, extant businesses that exist, game companies that exist because of that license. So we owe a debt of gratitude to 3.5 that I don't think that we can ever repay. Okay? And the reason that first edition came into existence was because of that open gaming license. Also, the reason that this is here is because of the open gaming license. More about this later. So all of those things are one of the reasons I see first edition Pathfinder as the best version of D&D. So I put off reading the second edition because, frankly, when I heard about it, I'm like, okay, another gaming company's just lost me as a customer when it comes to their fantasy line, because I don't want to switch over. I have no desire to go through all that effort and spend all that money, and because I like physical books. Not that having digital copies isn't awesome, because I have like 32 gigs of gaming books in my hand. I find them very useful when I'm out and about and I just want to read something quickly. I can dip into a gaming book, read a few pages, and then walk away and not feel I've left anything behind, because I can go back and pick it up right away. In fact, I believe I just finished reading The Witcher RPG, if I remember correctly. So I didn't want to read second edition, but I did it because I felt I had a degree of due diligence, and because I've had numerous requests from here on my channel. So we're going to start with Ancestries and Backgrounds. So first off, I'm happy about the fact that they called them Ancestries and not Races. Okay, that stripping the game of that term was awesome. Calling them Ancestries makes perfect sense. And their use of which particular ancestries to follow was not really all that shocking. They used essentially the core, a set of core species that we've been seeing in D&D for many, many decades. Sorry, I'm flipping forward to see if I can get the little pictures, which were so helpful when I was looking at the species. Here we go. So we got the ancestries available are dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, halfling, human, and under the human will be half elf and half orc, which I thought was a smart thing to do. And that's what we have for our core species. Now, I know that some of the other books that have come out have already introduced new people, new species, because I think I've seen discussions of them online, even though I haven't read the actual specific stats on those species. But these are the cores, and of course, under like halfling, you're going to have some divergence and, you know, some slight variations, as will be under elf and things like that. So very happy that they just came out of the gate. Won't hear your classic, nothing, all that. I'll admit that I do like the more unusual ancestries. I'm a humanoid animal fan, so when it comes to anthropomorphic races, I kind of like them. But I understand that they're not for everybody, and this is going to be the least bit of controversy that we have, you know, going on here. So I have no problems with that. Okay, so I started reading the species, the ancestries, and each ancestry has a 2-page spread. And within each description and those 2 pages are listed all of the feats that are pertinent and all the abilities that are pertinent to that species. Makes perfect sense. Everything is right in front of you, 2-page spread. You're awesome. And I read it, and I'm like, this game did that a long time ago. 2-page spread, all of your species abilities right here. Now, they did call them races back then, but we had not moved to the point where that became as problematic as it is now. And I'm not saying that this game is perfect, because it has some rather problematic things to say when it comes to ancestries. That, quite frankly, in my opinion, border on the concepts of racism. So, but I read it. I'm reading second edition, and I'm looking at this, and I'm like, what's the guy's name? I can't remember. Yeah, Dario Nardi, and I'm like, is he part of this design team? Because if he isn't, he needs a lawyer, because second edition completely and absolutely stole what he did a long time ago. I'm like, I was just stunned by that. I said, okay, all right. Moving forward. Now, you also have a slightly different take on ability boosts, but that isn't a huge shock on that one. They're trying to make the game more balanced. I understand that. For example, under human, we still have your ability to modify things more flexibly than any other ancestries, because humans are supposed to be the jack of all trades. That's not a shocker. We got halflings, which get like dexterity and wisdom plus a free one. The goblins get dexterity and charisma and a plus a free one, which is interesting that the goblins get charisma. I thought that was intriguing. Gnomes get constitution and charisma and a free one. The elves get dexterity, intelligence, and a free one, and the dwarves get a constitution, a wisdom, and a free one. And other than the goblins getting the charisma one, I thought that was kind of fascinating. Other than that, nothing really shocked me. Also, there are going to be flaws here. Dwarves get charisma, elves get constitution, gnomes get strength, goblins get wisdom, and halflings get strength, and humans don't get anyone. Okay, so we're all good on that one. Nothing out of the ordinary for there. They've balanced them out a little better. Moving on. Okay. Now we get to our classes. I guess what they will be eventually be called the core classes, as they referred to the classes in the original hardcover as the core classes, to differentiate them from like the base classes and the alternative classes that were introduced later. Calling the difference between the words core and base when it came to the classes, I thought was a bit of a silly act, but that's just me. So we've got Alchemist, Barbarian, Bard, Champion, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, and Wizard. Now, Champion is taking the place of the Paladin, because they've spread out the Champions concepts a little more, so you don't have to be lawful good. You can have different types of champions based on their oaths and their alignments, which is an idea which has been played around with for a long time in D&D. It's not an original idea, but they've baked it into the second edition Pathfinder. So the Alchemist, to my mind, doesn't diverge a great deal difference from the first edition Pathfinder, nor does the Barbarian or the Bard. Again, the Champion does, because it's a difference. Again, the classes are a little bit more balanced than they were under Pathfinder. Everything is tamped down in second edition. Under Pathfinder, lots of things were ranked. There were bonuses were +1 to +5. Now bonuses tend to be +1 to +3. So they've turned things down a little there, so that a +3 is more important than it was under first edition rather. But it's not as much oomph as a +5 had. So things are turned down a little bit, because they're trying to balance it, trying to let it be not quite as demigod-like, I guess, is the good way to look at it. And let's see now, anything I really I do like the fact that under each class they do recommend your key ability score plus your recommendation for a secondary ability score. So out of the gate, they're helping the player understand that, yeah, if you're going to play an alchemist, intelligence is your most key, but constitution and dexterity are also really important, particularly if you're going to be playing an alchemist that's going to be throwing a lot of bombs. Having a good dex is going to be decent, and having a good constitution, because you're dealing with a lot of volatile chemicals, could also be really useful. So I like the fact that out of the gate, they are telling the player, that a novice, that this is what you should be thinking about when you're doing your build. Then we have the clerics, which I didn't think was a huge difference really to my mind. I'm reading them and I'm like, yeah, the spell casting is a little bit different, but not a huge amount. So I was like, the cleric didn't stick out into my mind as being vastly different than first edition. Now the druid was, and I think in a good way. So you have traditions in the druid now. So you can start out of the gate. You can come out with, you can choose to have a plant-based, a wild shape-based, an animal-based, or a storm-based tradition. So if you choose plant or storm, that's completely different. You're coming out of the gate as very different from anything having to do with the original first edition. Those are abilities that you could pick up over time, but you're right. You're saying your character is different from a first edition druid. If you choose the animal companion route, well, that's the bog standard first edition character. Okay? If you choose the wild shape route, you're going to be able to assume wild shape abilities at first level, which was kind of an option under certain circumstances under first edition, if you look under the right kind of options, but it wasn't in the core book. Okay, that was an ability you picked up later. And in fact, as you get higher levels and for the druid, you'll be able to pick up a second tradition. So you could, if you wanted to, rebuild the traditional first edition druid very easily by taking the animal companion as your first tradition and picking up the wild shape as your second. And you're going to be very much a first edition character. Now, personally, I would be taking the wild shape out of the gate on this character for a druid, because the idea of the shape changing ability of the druid is, to me, the selling point, period. So that's, if I could do that for first level, yes sirree, sign me up. And I may take the animal companion as a secondary one, because that is always useful to have somebody to watch your back. Okay, so that, to my mind, was a very smart thing to do. Okay, next we get into fighter, and again, they've given the fighter a bit more boosts when it comes to abilities, and that was something that they had some success in first edition over 3.5, and they've just kind of continued that concept forward. Then we get to the monk, and again, monks has traditions, but that idea is not really new. First edition did that as well to some degree. So there are differences, and you can rebuild the first edition monk if you want to under second edition. It's just going to take a little bit of effort, but you could probably do it. Then we get to the ranger. Now, ranger is something that some people, more than one person, pointed out to me. So you're going to like the fact that the ranger doesn't have a spell casting ability, and you're right. The fact that the ranger ever had a spell casting ability was always a little bit strange. At least under first edition rules, it wasn't something you picked up until later in life, which sort of made some sense. You've made a greater and greater connection to the world around you, to the natural world. So you pick up an ability to cast spells at a later date. But the other classes tended this ability to be like right out of the gate, and that just didn't fit to me. And the fact that this is now a class that has no spell casting ability is fine. The class is very much a fighter geared towards the wilderness, and you can take a number of different traditions, one of which is the archery, which is kind of the classic ranger. We get that from Lord of the Rings. So that's all for the good in my book. I think they did a solid job when it came to the ranger. However, let me say that there were spellless rangers available under first edition. This is not an entirely new concept. Okay? So it's not the revolution that it necessarily could be. It's available if you wanted to make it work. Then we have the rogue, and again you have I don't think it was vastly different. Again, more well balanced. You can go down different traditions, what kind of a rogue you want to be, that kind of thing. Then we get into the sorcerer. Now the sorcerer is intriguing. Okay, the sorcerer is intriguing because under first edition there had been an entire group of spontaneous casters using different abilities as the driving force behind their spell casting. So the standard sorcerer was charisma, but there were other classes that used your intelligence or your wisdom, but were spontaneous casters. They've folded all of those ideas into the sorcerer, which I think is all for the good. It makes the sorcerer more interesting, cleans things up, puts everything under one category that had been spread out amongst them, not much different. Now, because of this, the Sorcerer Bloodlines will not only be deciding what kind of abilities you have, but which is your core spell casting ability, and if you are channeling arcane, divine, or occult spells, which I think is awesome. There aren't enough bloodlines for my taste in this book. I would have liked to have seen at least twice as many as they offered. Seriously. One of the beautiful things about first edition, there were so many Sorcerer Bloodlines. Yes, it was a lot of choice, and again, the whole choice paralysis, I get that. But you could do so much with that game, and you could really tune it in to play the kind of sorcerer you wanted to play. But that being said, I'm sure there will be many more, and I'm sure there already are. Again, I've only looked at the core books. I have not looked at any of the secondary books for the second edition rules. So I happen to really like what they did with the sorcerer as far as making them a wider net than they were before and giving them much more diversity. And also, now when you're facing a sorcerer, what are you facing? Much better. You don't necessarily know that the person has taken charisma as their high score. Charisma could be their dumb stat. So that keeps your people on their toes. Of course, what they're wearing might give it a hint too. If they're wearing a big prevalent holy symbol, they're probably channeling something through the wisdom score. So next we have, and last we have the wizard. Now, the wizard class itself was, again, a little bit more well-balanced. But the biggest thing is that arcane casting is significantly different. Now, I have heard complaints that wizards have been too powerful since 1978. So let nobody tell you that this was a problem with 3rd edition or 3.5, or it was a problem with 1st edition Pathfinder. No. It's been a complaint for the entirety of the entire concept of D&D. Okay? And many people have suggested nerfs for wizards that would then solve that problem. Okay? We'll get there. They didn't just nerf arcane casting under 2nd edition. They called down an orbital kinetic strike. Arcane casting in this game is completely different. And in fact, it reminded me a great deal of the arcane casting rules from this game. Far more limited options, very well balanced, still powerful if you decided to invest your character's developmental points over time, but not nearly as powerful, nearly as godlike as 3.5 was. And speaking of this, all of the classes in 2nd edition have a 4-page spread, and under that 4-page spread are all of the feats that you will ever need for that class, all handily set up in front of you in order of their power. There's also an alphabetical list next to each one in case you need to know that. Just like this. And again, Mr. Nardi, get a goddamn lawyer if somebody didn't pay you. Because they seriously just copied Radiance. Their ancestries are the same. Their classes are the same. I'm reading this, and I'm sitting in the cafeteria at work, reading this, listening to music on my headphones, and I just stopped, and I'm like, staring around like, is this a joke? Has nobody else noticed? Nobody has mentioned this to me in all these discussions I've heard about second edition. Nobody has mentioned the fact that they completely and utterly ripped off the entire core concept of Radiance, because they did. And I'm reading it, and I'm getting to, like, they've really taken this into a different direction. They have separated Pathfinder from D&D, from the 3.5 open gaming license completely. There is no longer a connection to 3.5. You cannot just port over 3.5 material into the second edition rules. That is not going to happen. It's its own thing now. Okay? Just like it would be very difficult to do that for Radiance, you can't do it for second edition. And that's when something hit me. I set these books up on my table, and I'm holding this in my hand in this way for a reason. Pathfinder First Edition, the best version of D&D ever made. Radiance, one of the best set of fantasy rules I've ever read. And if somebody said, you can't use Pathfinder First Edition, what would you use? It would be Radiance every single time. Because with Radiance, I can run high fantasy, I can run gritty fantasy, I can run steampunk, I can do electrotech, I can do Buck Rogers with Radiance, okay? Absolutely do Buck Rogers with Radiance. Okay, incredibly versatile, incredibly well balanced, so much diversity, and the building blocks are so simple. 2 pages for ancestries, 4 pages for classes, and plus the additional material that was available. Their GM's guide is weak, but the expansion kit that came out is awesome. I have to do a video on that one. So many things I have to do videos on. But that is different enough from first edition Pathfinder and 3.5 that it's spread them far enough apart that I still like it. This is in between. This is smack dab in between first edition and Radiance. And I'm reading it and how quantified they've made it. Cast a spell is C-A-S, all capital. Cast a spell. Stride, step, strike. Everything is incredibly quantified and very much spelled out in capital letters. And I'm reading it, I'm like, this is 4th edition. This is an influence of 4th edition on 1st edition Pathfinder. Now, Radiance used some of the 4th edition concepts. I despise 4th edition. I didn't mind them at all in Radiance. Why? It separated itself far enough. It got far enough out of that sweet spot that I consider to be D&D that I didn't care. There are still things about Radiance that I am questionable on. Doesn't matter. When it came to those kinds of concepts it borrowed from 4th edition, I didn't mind them. Because again, it had changed itself far enough that I could tolerate it. I'm reading this, and it's not far enough away from 1st edition. It hasn't made the leap that Radiance did. And I'm reading this, and I can feel a stranglehold on the rule system. because I cannot help but firmly believe that the people that wrote second edition desperately wanted to make this a point-buy system, just like Radiance. But they couldn't, because if they made that different from first edition and from D&D, they'd lose their core audience. Because there aren't as many fans for Radiance out there as there are for first edition Pathfinder. And they knew if they made that complete leap to separate themselves and make it a point-buy system that would let you build any kind of character you want with incredibly flexible rules, they'd lose some of their audience, and they are desperate to not do that. Paizo's a smaller company than Wizards. They can't afford to lose anybody. Wizards was more than willing to throw every single 3.5 customer they had under the bus, because they knew they would have eager fans out there that would excitedly gobble up 4th edition, and they did. Paizo can't risk that. So Paizo has to come up with something that's close enough to the 1st edition to bring their fans with them, but far enough away from 1st edition to justify the rule system. So they can't do what Radiance did. But I could feel that they wanted to. I'm reading this, and I've read enough rule systems over the years. I can feel it in the writing that they want to do something else, and they can't. So what did they do? They balanced the living crap out of 1st edition Pathfinder. And that's their solution. So, let's go back to my beginning here, so I can go back to the table of contents. Here we go. So then we get into the skills, and the skills here, they've done something smart. Because whenever you had skills under 1st edition, it was very much evident that there were plateaus that everybody wanted to hit. They're like, oh, if you want to play this kind of character, you don't need more than X number of ranks in a skill. And if you want to play this kind of character, you don't need more than X, X plus 1 number of ranks. So it was very evident, if you looked at the type of builds that people were coming up with, that there were definitely tiers. And hell, we've been using the term tier when it came to breaking down which classes were more powerful than others for how long? 20 years? So that they've quantified the skill system so that there is a 5-tier system, so that it's very distinctly going from novice to legendary, or I think it's called legendary, made perfect sense. So no longer do you have to worry about individual skill ranks. You have to worry, okay, your character is good at these kind of skills, and as long as you invest more into them, they keep getting better and better. So it's the same idea, as you're still spending developmental quanta to get to the higher levels of skills, but now you're not juggling skill ranks. Now you're just dealing with these very distinct quantified steps. So I don't have a problem with that. I like what they've done with some of the idea that if you make a critical success, you can get a different result than just a normal success. There's also the critical failure. I'm not a fan of critical failures. I'm not a fan of critical failures because the more times you roll the dice, the more times you have to run the risk of getting a critical fumble. So a 1st level character is not going to be rolling as many dice as a 20th level character, which ironically means the 20th level character has more opportunities to get a critical fumble than does a 1st level character. Yes, a single die roll, it's a 5% chance to get a 1. But if you're rolling 4 times every single combat as opposed to once, and when it comes to a skill, for example, you've got 4 chances of rolling a 1 when the other guy only had a single chance of rolling a 1. That's 4 opportunities to have a fumble. I don't like critical fumbles. I haven't in a very long time. I used them in 1st edition, and I decided I didn't like them, and I haven't used them since for that reason. They also have that with the saving throws when it comes to spells, and some of them are very creative. So you get, if somebody fails a little bit, it's not as bad as a critical failure, and if they just if they make it, critical failure is much worse than a failure. And if they just barely make it, this happens if they have a critical success in their roll. You're maybe immune to the person's abilities for that. Yada yada yada. It's creating a more interesting saving throw mechanism. But again, still not a big fan of critical failures. We get into feats, and these are the feats that are dealing with not dealing with the class and ancestry specific stuff. Those are in the ancestries and classes. This is more generic feats. They're generic in the sense that they're could be taken by more than one class or more than one ancestry, but they are also very much broken down into like magical types of feats and fighter types of feats and truly generic type of feats that can be taken by anybody. So they're feats. There's not as many of them in this book as there is in the entirety of first edition. I didn't compare to see how many feats there are in second edition compared to the first edition player's handbook or core rulebook. I don't know if there's a difference. It would not surprise me that there are fewer in this than there were in that. Again, everything has been seen to be paring it down and making it more streamlined and making it more well balanced and quantifying it a great deal more. One thing I was surprised by as I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, they've made enough differences from first edition. Why didn't they do away with with stats? Why didn't we do away with stat numbers and then just have stat bonuses like Mutants and Masterminds did? So a person who has an absolutely average strength has a strength of 0. A person who's slightly weak has a strength of -1, and a person who's slightly strong has a strength of +1. No numbers, just a bonus. You don't have to figure it out in your head. Okay, this guy's got an 18 strength. That means that's 8 points above a 10. Divide that in half. That means you get a +4. Now, yes, all of us know that an 18 is +4. But the idea is you have to do a bit of math in your head to figure out that the guy with the stat has what kind of bonus they have based on the difference between that number and a 10, whether it's a positive or a negative. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, then I thought to myself, why the hell didn't Radiance do that? Because Radiance is far enough away from D&D that they could have gotten away with it in my book. But they didn't want to completely, disillusion all of the classic D&D players any more than these people wanted to disillusion all the classic D&D players or the classic Pathfinder players. So they didn't do that. Okay, so yeah. Then we get into equipment, and I was happy to see that the equipment has now both a weight and a bulk. I was so happy. I cannot describe to you how happy I was when I got to the idea that equipment has both a weight and a bulk. So now we don't have to have swords that weigh 3 times what they do in the real world because, well, it's supposed to justify the bulkiness of using the... Don't give me that BS. Weight and bulk are different. The fact that you pretended that they were the same was BS the first time I heard it, and it's BS now. It's a BS that first edition Pathfinder still uses that bizarre, twisted logic, and I'm really thrilled that they have differentiated themselves and accepted that there's a difference between weight and bulk. So, kudos on the second edition Pathfinder team for having done that. Wow, this is going long. Then we get into a whole bunch of spells, and as I mentioned, the idea of the different saving throws was really quite cool. And I realized that there's a focus concept when it comes to spells, and I have not covered it because I don't remember the rules in great detail. It makes you better at casting that particular spell, and I get it. And it still doesn't change the fact that they have nuked the arcane spellcasting and spellcasting in general in this version as opposed to first edition. I understand that people have been complaining about spellcasters forever. These folks have finally done something, but they've done something in my book that makes me feel constrained. I would not play a spellcaster under this system. Flat out. I'm like, you've taken the fun out of it. Whereas I would play a spellcaster under this system because this system is different enough to not give me the distaste that second edition does. Now, you're going to say, well, that's an emotional justification. You're saying that your emotional investment in first edition is having an impact on your emotional investment in a game system. So you're not separating yourself from the rules. And you're right. Because if I'm going to play a game, I have to invest myself in that character. And for me, that is more than a purely intellectual pursuit. I want to know about that character's motivations. And that, as any actor can tell you, is here. If you think you can act purely from here, you're going to be the Yngwie Malmsteen of actors. Technically, you may actually be very skilled, but it's got no damn heart, just like his music doesn't. But if you act from here, you get to carry one of those little gold statues off a stage someday. I need to feel an emotional connection to the game. And I feel that with first edition. I feel that with Pathfinder, with Radiance rather. I don't feel it with second edition. I have no interest in this system. It feels constrained. It feels like it wants to be Radiance. It wants to be a spell point. I mean, it wants to be a point buy system. And it isn't, because it doesn't want to disillusion the first edition fans. It wants to bring them over. Maybe third edition will go further. Maybe third edition will be more like Radiance. But here's folks, here's a great thing. This is a hardcover copy that I cherish. But you know what you can do right now? You can go on to Drive-Thru RPG, or is it RPG Now? I can't remember which one's still around. One of the two. I still buy stuff from them, so whatever it is, I know the links. But you can go there right now and get a 100% legal free copy of this game, of this core book, right now. Won't cost you a dime, not a penny. And you'll have everything you need to play something drastically different from Pathfinder First Edition. It's a point-buy system. It's balanced. It's interesting. Huge amounts of flexibility. And it's all in one book. The GM's Guide will cost you a little bit. I don't think it's really worth it for your time, but that's just me. I've been doing this for a long time. But this expansion kit, I'd pick that up too for money. It's worth it. And again, digital copies, they're not expensive. But you can get this right now for nothing. Go read it. I think you're going to get a hell of a lot more out of this than you are from Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I just got no interest in this. Now, when I read Starfinder, I have not talked about Starfinder much on this channel, but I have read this system, and I have read some of the supplements. I thought that's what 2nd Edition was going to be. I really did. I'm like, okay, you're giving me a sneak preview. You're going to take this system right here that you've designed for Starfinder, which is a science fantasy system. You're taking high fantasy and mixing it with space opera and cramming it together, kind of like they did with Dragonstar, which was an awesome 3.5 setting in my book. And you're presenting it under the rubric of the first edition rules. You've changed the Pathfinder first edition rules somewhat to incorporate the intersection of high fantasy and space opera, but they're all still there, and it all clicks, and it's all awesome. And I'm thinking that's what second edition is going to be. They're giving me a preview, and second edition isn't that, which is another head scratcher. They put a lot of effort into Starfinder. Paizo dumped a lot of money into Starfinder. So I'm like, why would you dump all that money into a system that works, then not just reuse it for second edition Pathfinder? Why would you come out with an entirely different system that isn't compatible with Starfinder? So now you've got Starfinder, which is a new system. It's not old. And you've got Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which is a new system. Why wouldn't you let them do this? What? Why would you do that? You have an incredibly cool high fantasy space opera mashup, and then you could have all the high fantasy supplements and content for Pathfinder 2nd Edition meshing with that. So you could get people that don't ever want to play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, who are huge Starfinder fans, buying up your content to put it into their Starfinder games. Instead, they came up with an entirely different system that feels like it's got a chokehold on it. That feels constrained and limited and just not what I'm interested in. And I don't know how the sales of second edition have been compared to first edition. I don't know how the sales of Starfinder have been compared to first. I haven't looked at the numbers. Probably never going to. I don't really care. But I can tell you right now, I frequent enough boards and I listen to enough people that the buzz for both Starfinder and second edition have not been as big as they were for Pathfinder, the original rules. Starfinder, in fact, has got considerably more buzz than in my book than I've read second edition. Second edition has come and people have like, yeah, well, we've moved over. Yep, and we're doing it now. This is what we're going to play now. And yeah, this is our game, and this is what we're doing, and these are the adventures we're playing, and there's no excitement at all. Whereas when Pathfinder hit, everybody was buzzing about it. We spent, what, was it 10 years? There's so much first edition Pathfinder content out there, third party, not to mention all the core stuff. You could game under Pathfinder first edition for the next 1,000 years and never get bored. You throw Radiance into it, and you could game until the sun grows cold. Okay? I'm not seeing that with second edition. Now, I've gone on way too long here, and I apologize. I've rambled and rattled, and I've probably not covered enough of the nuts and bolts that people wanted, but that's okay. The nuts and bolts didn't interest me a lot because as I read more and more of it, I felt more and more of a chokehold, and I just kept thinking to myself, if you want something that's different from Pathfinder first edition, go pick up Radiance. You're going to be a hell of a lot happier than you are with second edition. It's going to be something that's going to captivate you, going to make you interested in stuff. And as opposed to what I'm seeing second edition is, yeah, it's the new edition. Okay. So to say that I'm not really excited about it is an understatement. Now, I will also be covering the gaming book, the game mastering book for Pathfinder second edition, and the bestiary at some point in the future, because I think that they deserve videos of their own. But as a rule system, I have no interest in the second edition, and I can't really grasp why anybody does. Yes, it's much more balanced, but it's also a lot blander. And it's balanced in a way that I think Radiance does just as well, without feeling constrained, without feeling like it's got a chokehold on it, without feeling like it's disrespected both first edition Pathfinder and the history of D&D from 3.5. Now, some of you may be asking me what my thoughts are on 5th edition. Never read it. I'm currently looking at it. So there'll be a video about that someday in the future too. Who knows when? But yeah, wasn't impressed by 2nd edition. I don't know if people thought I was going to be. If they thought I was going to hop on that bandwagon and be thrilled to death with the changes they made. There are things in there I think are really cool. But by and large, I got no interest. So let's talk about Pathfinder 2nd edition. And I'm sure that the comments below are going to be oh so colorful.